Welcome to the Dispatch Podcast. I'm Steve Hayes, joined by Jonah Goldberg, Sarah Isgur, and John McCormack this morning to talk about a number of things. Most importantly, top priority is the ongoing war between Israel and Iran. When we recorded this last week, that war had not yet started. Now it's been almost a full week, and the situation has changed pretty dramatically. John, can you just give us a big picture, 30,000-foot overview of the news of the past week as it relates to Israel and Iran?
Big picture. I think most people have been stunned by the success of Israel establishing dominance over the skies of Iran, taking out top echelons of the military, nuclear scientists. And the big question in the United States now is a question of, will we become directly involved? And the immediate question there is whether President Trump will order a strike on this hardened nuclear facility underneath a mountain in Fordow. And that is the main question that's sort of gripping Washington, I would say, right at the moment.
Yeah, Jonah, this is the changes have been very fast. And if you think back to conversations that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu were having earlier this spring, the reporting that we were reading, just a month ago, the view was that Donald Trump was opposed to these strikes, any Israeli kinetic action, and that the United States was determined to continue with diplomacy. There was a big New York Times article this week that walked through sort of point by point how Trump came to accept that Netanyahu was going to do this. Do you have any thoughts on what led to Trump being at least okay with Netanyahu doing this, and any sense of when Netanyahu had decided that he was going to go ahead regardless of the United States support?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be more and more criminology about this over the weeks, months, years, decades. But it seems pretty obvious to me that, we see it now with Trump saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. I want to keep my options open, right? I think that has been his approach to almost everything, not just Iran stuff. And it seems pretty clear to me that the Israelis very smartly banked Trump's statement that he was giving Iran 60 days. And had an argument ready for why on the 61st day they were going to open a can of whoop-ass or two. And and I think the thing that brought Trump further and further on side with the Israelis is the success. You can see it in his Truth Social posts where he says he uses the word "we" a lot, right? And he wants to claim ownership of these successes, and sort of talks about Israel as if it is his proxy, right? It is the Israelis are his button man, as it were, and on a strict policy level, that to me is preferable than a lot of the other possible ways this could have played out. It's not the ideal scenario, but it is preferable to some of the others. And I think that this is the thing which we should note. John did a great TikTok on the wars inside the MAGA coalition about this. I think that is the thing at the end of the day that is driving a big chunk of his biggest fans, allegedly biggest fans, crazy, is that Trump was never an isolationist. He was, I've brought up this term a couple times on here, and I know everyone rolls their eyes at it, this term sovereigntist. But the difference between an isolationist and a sovereigntist is both isolationists and sovereigntists don't like alliances, but isolationists don't want to, leave our shores. They want to just be a fortress America and let the world have its problems. Sovereigntists just don't want anything to constrain what they want to do. And if they want to go and slap around some country 6,000 miles away, they should be free to do it without anybody saying you can't do that. And that's much more of what Trump is in this stuff. And he likes he likes to back winners. He likes displays of strength, and he likes to take credit for stuff. And I think that's the biggest thing that's driving this right now. And it could lead into some bad things. I think it's sort of crazy for Trump to be talking about unconditional surrender. that's a very loaded term that backs the mullahs into a corner. But again, it's better than a lot of the alternative scenarios.
Yeah. Sarah, there's been reporting this week from a variety of sources that, in effect, this was all cooked up a while ago, that Trump's public posture opposing Israeli strikes, opposing Israel doing what Israel has done over the past week, was really just that, oppose, and that he didn't really mean it, that he and Benjamin Netanyahu had sort of come up with this plan where the United States was going to push for diplomacy and continue to push for diplomacy. Israel was going to do what Israel needed to do. The United States would oppose it. Trump would make public statements suggesting that he wanted diplomacy to continue, all with sort of a wink and a nod. That feels more speculative to me than grounded in a lot of detailed fact-based reporting. But you've read those stories. Where do you come out?
The problem is they're sort of unfalsifiable because
Right.
it is in the Trump administration's interest and the Israeli government's interest to now hew to that story, whether it's true or not. And so I have no idea because it's such like ex post rationalization. It could be totally true, but I would need to see something from before the strike, the initial Israeli strike, to back that up for me to actually believe it. Because both versions make perfect sense. The version where Trump was seriously against it, then Netanyahu it goes really well. And so Trump hops on board and says he was always on board. Or the version where Trump has actually been very successful in the Middle East in a lot of respects, in both his first term and this term, far beyond what other people thought his administration would be capable of. And my God, the Israelis have had every strategic thought work out well for them. So the idea that maybe Netanyahu would have come up with this plan and asked the Trump administration to go along with it and play their role also, to me, makes a lot of sense. But again, I wouldn't believe anyone's rationalization now. I would want to see paperwork from the before times.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, just for the record, about how there's going to be a lot of criminology going forward about all this, because I don't believe 100% of any version of any of these things.
Yeah. Well, Jonah, let me ask you about part of your conversation with Ken Pollack on the Remnant yesterday. You had on Ken Pollack, a colleague of yours, certainly an expert in these areas. And one of the things you asked him about, and I'd say pressed him about, were these claims by the Israeli government of sort of a new imminence to the Iranian nuclear program, finishing the construction of a bomb. And again, we've seen in remarks from Netanyahu claims that there's new intelligence, that this now seemed like a much shorter time frame than people had been suggesting, and that this action was required right now because the path to a bomb had shortened. There's been, I'd say, a fair degree of skepticism certainly in the U.S. press, but even among American lawmakers and lawmakers who support Israel about these new claims. What did Ken Pollack tell you, and where do you net out on that part of the argument?
He's now the senior vice president at the Middle East Institute, longtime colleague. So, anyway, yeah, I don't buy. I mean, so Ken thinks that Bibi's playing fast and loose and talking much like. Well, look, I mean, there are these videos out there. They've compiled them. I think CNN has a clip reel on this of Bibi saying the Iranians are minutes away from having a bomb for like 20 years. Bibi Netanyahu has been obsessed with the Iranian nuclear program for a very long time. There are a lot of people, you hear stories about how if you want to talk to him about tax reform or Hamas, if you keep talking for too long, he's going to turn it to the conversation to the Iranian nuclear program. He kind of thinks that's his mission, is to prevent that. And so personally, I think I agree with Ken about this. There's no evidence yet persuasive evidence that they were 10 seconds to midnight of getting this bomb ready to go, right, or any of that kind of stuff. And I think it's kind of a mistake for the way Bibi has talked about it, for him to try to do that, because it induces a certain amount of Iraq War PTSD flashbacks. And moreover, partly for reasons that were gotten into on advisory opinions, but there's just no evidence that you need to have the imminence thing. Iran has been at war with us for a very long time. Iran says all the time that they want to destroy us, that we're the great Satan. They've killed, I don't know what the full number is, several thousand Americans at various points, including American troops during the Iraq War. They have proxy. I mean, certainly they're in a regular state of war with Israel. I mean, that's just by any conventional understanding of what war is. They've been at war with Israel for a very long time, using proxies and doing other things. And while I think the AUMF, the authorization of use of military force from the Iraq War, or from the after 9/11, really should be updated, because it's kind of become this enabling act to just blow up people. If you just read the actual text of it, there's more than enough predicate there for Iran being involved in 9/11, right? So you can just go, you can unwind this a million different ways. And so I think you don't need to make the imminence argument, in part because no reasonable person anymore, like this is another thing that Pollack and I were talking about, there's no one who claims, even tries to claim, that Iran wants this nuclear program for peaceful domestic energy purposes. Like, you don't need to refine the uranium to 60% for domestic energy. They've built no nuclear power plants. Like 5 to 10% of enriched uranium will do the trick, but they're going to 60% because to get from 60%, you're just on the precipice of fissile material. And I'm not saying it's not true that they're very close to a bomb or they made the decision to make a bomb, but the whole point was you wanted to get to a position. You didn't want Iran to get to a position where they could make that decision, and that means you have to. It's prevention, not preemption. And I got Jimmy Crack Corn, and I don't care. I think America is perfectly fine in doing this. I'd rather Congress authorize it. I think you can make the case Congress has authorized it. I certainly think Israel is entirely within its rights to be doing this under the laws of war and common sense. But if we want to dot I's and cross T's, by all means, go ahead and do that.
So the biggest voice, or maybe the most important voice, taking, I would say, a different position from the one that you articulated with respect to Iran's program, is the U.S. intelligence community. When Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard testified in Congress earlier this spring, she said, quote, "The intelligence community continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003. So while I think logic, it's hard to explain what Iran is doing unless you believe that Iran is working towards nuclear weapons. But the official position of the U.S. intelligence community is that Iran is not working towards nuclear weapons. John, does Tulsi Gabbard said that in earlier this spring. Donald Trump, when he was asked about this on Air Force One earlier this week, told reporters that he doesn't care what Tulsi Gabbard says, and said Iran is close to the bomb. He seems to be siding with the Benjamin Netanyahu assessment. Were you surprised to hear Trump totally disregard what Tulsi Gabbard has said and what the intelligence community that she speaks for was assessing?
I wasn't surprised, and I think Trump didn't do this, but I think you actually can sort of reconcile Gabbard's point and the Netanyahu point. I think there is some parsing about they're not building the bomb exactly. They're not actually assembling the bomb, but they are enriching enough material to be very close to being able to have that breakout period. So I think you can sort of reconcile that. Steve, you would know better than I on that question.
Well, let me just push back on that or get you to go further. Yes, but I think you can. I think you can say they are pursuing a bomb, but they have not yet gotten to the point where they have breakout capacity. But the statement that she read said they don't have a nuclear weapons program. I think that is hard to reconcile with what Donald Trump is saying. I mean, if they have been working for years, some would argue decades, on the component parts of a nuclear bomb, doesn't that sort of in and of itself mean that they have a program?
For sure, and I think that it's obvious that he no longer trusts her, has lost confidence in her. I would say an even bigger data point than his dismissal of her aboard Air Force One was a decision to leave her out of a key meeting at Camp David on June 8th, I believe it was, where CIA Director Ratcliffe and Trump and other top national security people were present at Camp David to discuss a possible Israeli attack on Iran. Gabbard was left out of that, supposedly because she had National Guard duty. Kind of seems like the thing that she would have been able to cancel, kind of high-level meeting, if she were trusted in Trump world. And then
she was washing her hair that night.
Right, yeah. And then she came out 2 days later with that weird video, direct-to-camera, talking about the threat of nuclear war. I mean, yeah, Trump effectively put a Glenn Greenwald Democrat as his top director of national intelligence, and that is not who Trump is, as Jonah said. Jonah called him a sovereigntist. I think some people would say Jacksonian. But it's obvious that he, no longer has, if he ever had a lot of confidence in her, he doesn't trust her on this issue, I would say.
Yeah, so Steve, just really quickly on this, yeah. I'm sorry to hijack, but you're new to this moderating thing, and I'm just assuming you're trying out some of the patented Sarah Isgur steel manning devil's advocacy stuff here, because there's just no friggin' way you believe that Iran isn't developing a nuclear weapons program. Like seriously, I will demand a blood test if you tell me, well, it's an open question because Tulsi Gabbard says so, and the ODNI says so.
Yeah, no, that's correct. You know me well, but I do think, I mean, it is instructive. This was a controversial assessment when it was revealed. It may have happened earlier as well, but I remember there was a huge public fight about this, I believe in 2007, when General Michael Hayden was still CIA director, and they provided this public assessment that Iran was not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and that ran against the views of many senior Bush administration officials, some of whom were open to taking it out, some of whom wanted Israel to take it out then.
John Bolton wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal that basically ended his relationship with W. Bush, saying we got to do this. Or maybe that was about North Korea, but it was around that same time. Anyway,
right.
Go on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think the intelligence community assessment relies on very careful parsing of language, but it's hard to explain why Iran has been doing what Iran has been doing unless you believe that they're pursuing a nuclear weapon, and I think Occam's razor suggests that they are. Sarah, if you look at some of the things that the White House did on the comms front this week, very interesting. Middle of the week, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, they put out a series of tweets from the White House Rapid Response Twitter handle, or X handle, with video of all of the times in the past 2-3 years, maybe even going back further, that Donald Trump had said, this is very simple, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And he has said it. I mean, Donald Trump, I don't think, is consistent about much. He's been consistent about that. He has said that repeatedly. I guess two questions. One, should we believe that this is sort of a core view of Donald Trump, since he's articulated it this way so many times, number one? And number two, if you're working in the comm shop at the White House and you're putting this out, are you doing this because you want to win a rhetorical war, or you want to set the record straight with sort of MAGA within the Republican Party? Or are you doing this because you're trying to justify action that could be coming?
Set aside this White House for a moment. The traditional role of the White House communications shop is to maximize options for their boss. you have the policy folks in the Oval Office making the decision. Depending on how senior and how trusted the White House press secretary or the White House communications director is, they may or may not be in that room. They're unlikely to be in the Situation Room, for instance, when those type of decisions are being made. So assume for a second that they're not in the room for the decision. Their job on the outside, though, they know what meeting is going on and they know what's being discussed, again, generally speaking. And their job on the outside is to maximize the president's decision-making ability with the public. Now, you asked about this White House because, as I think you already knew, this White House does operate a little differently. They seem to have different factions that want to pin in the president. Now, look, there's nothing particularly new about that either. There's always factions in the White House. They always want to influence the president's decisions. But all that being said, I actually think this looks like pretty old school White House comm strategy. Maximize the president's opportunities to make any decision he wants in that room, because I think it's pretty clear that President Trump has not decided about U.S. involvement and the scope of U.S. involvement. I think that's for good reason. I think that, if he ruled out any involvement today and then Iran had a truck full of drones launched from DuPont Circle, that would have to change the calculus. So I do think he hasn't made a decision. I think it's the White House comms office's job to make sure everyone knows that, and that, if he makes this decision, that will be very consistent with what he said. If he decides we're not getting involved, it's because he does not believe that Iran will get a nuclear weapon. So right now, at least, that looks like a pretty smart comm strategy from where I'm sitting.
So, John, let's get into your piece. You have a piece that we posted Thursday morning, looking at all of this big debate in MAGA world, in the Republican Party, in the country at large, about Trump's views on Iran, about whether they're consistent with MAGA or American First, the splits in the MAGA movement. Can you just take us through the reporting that you did this week and tell us where Trump ends up, why he holds the views he holds, and what's the likelihood that he'll maintain support from this MAGA movement?
Sure. Yeah, I think the loudest voice, the most prominent voice in opposition to U.S. support, simply support, not involvement in the war in Iran, has been Tucker Carlson, who has been a key ally of Trump's for several years. He came out of the gate last Friday, hours after the Israeli campaign against Iran began, saying that Trump was complicit in the attack and that the U.S. should drop Israel. And Tucker was very explicit, saying that meant no funding, no U.S. weapons, not merely no U.S. troops on the ground. He's been joined by people like Steve Bannon, former White House chief strategist and current host of a podcast, Marjorie Taylor Greene. But I went down to Congress just to sort of take the temperature of folks down there, and obviously Trump is the leader of the Republican Party, and the Republican Party has been strongly opposed to Iran, strongly supportive of Israel, strongly supportive of Trump. So there's really not much dissent, at least in the Senate. Talked to Ted Cruz. He made the point that Trump, and most everybody except for Rand Paul, thinks that Trump has the inherent authority, or the AUMF that Jonah mentioned against al-Qaeda. He has the authority to do this. And so I think that basically is where most people are comfortable with Trump making this decision himself. There's really not any blowback. It doesn't seem like anyone is really rushing to Tucker's defense. Trump himself said yesterday in the Oval Office that Tucker called him to apologize and for his comments, and that they may still have an impasse if Tucker thinks that Iran can have a nuclear weapon. Trump just says whether you have to fight or not, they can't have a nuclear weapon. So he seems intent on taking action if he thinks that's necessary and will be successful to disable or destroy this nuclear facility. He seems ready. That's what the reporting out there already suggests, that he's ready to authorize it, but he hasn't given a final order. So that's sort of where things stand right now.
So getting into a little of the internal MAGA Kremlinology, it was interesting that in the reporting we talked about Tulsi Gabbard on this podcast last week, and the fact that she was not included in the Camp David conversation that took place now roughly 2 weeks ago that was about U.S. strategy toward Israel and Iran. And that she put out this weird 3-minute video potentially as an effort to have a voice in that conversation without having been present in that conversation. There's been subsequent reporting. Politico reported this week that that was, in fact, what had happened, and that Trump was frustrated that Gabbard put out this video in which she talked about political elite warmongers and warned about the horrors of nuclear war. It's been interesting to see who has risen to her defense, as the president publicly said he doesn't care what she thinks. She's taken criticism from people in the Republican Party who, have effectively called her what you said earlier, basically a Glenn Greenwald Democrat. Politico reported that J.D. Vance, the vice president, offered a statement in her defense that I believe came in unprompted to the Politico reporters working on this piece. What do you make of the fact that Vance was the first one to, maybe unbidden, defend Tulsi Gabbard in public in this way?
Well, Vance himself is ideologically much closer to being an isolationist than anyone else at the top of the administration. Tucker Carlson's son works for him. Tucker Carlson was a key voice in getting J.D. Vance elevated. So I don't have any original behind-the-scenes reporting, but I think you can just tell from his behavior that he is likely in the camp that's been trying to dissuade Trump. But he put out a tweet the other day basically saying, I'm on Trump's side, whatever he decides. I can see what's going on in the background. MAGA world, you need to trust the president here. If he thinks additional steps are needed to take out the nuclear program, that's what he'll do. I think one other aspect, too, it's so interesting, is that, as Trump is on the brink of potentially the most serious and consequential foreign policy decision of either term, the debate among both sides are sort of, again, appealing to his ego and which side is truly MAGA. So Trump, the vice president of the United States, was squabbling, with, I believe, a self-described Twitter pugilist, Dave Reboy, on Twitter the other day. Reboy accused Vance of someone on his team leaking to Politico that there were negotiations underway, peace talks. Trump immediately disputed this, and Reboy accused Vance of this. Vance, the vice president of the United States, felt it necessary to respond, and what does he respond with? But saying, this loser supported DeSantis in the primary, to which Reboy replies, well, this guy's an Evan McMullin voter. And, sort of on and on it goes. Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon were doing the same thing on their podcasts. Mark Levin has come under fire for saying back in 2016 he wouldn't vote for Trump. So again, it's as equally predictable as it is perverse that as we are on the brink of this hugely consequential foreign policy decision, the varying factions are trying to appeal to Trump's ego just based on who's been a loyalist and who has supported him. And the truth is that in the Church of Trump, that few are without sin. At some point, either privately or publicly, they have gotten on his bad side or not been fully supportive of him.
Yeah, Jonah, one of the things that's been notable since that J.D. Vance defense of Tulsi Gabbard, and he put out this long statement on X in which he, as John, I think, summarized, said, I'm on Trump's side, whatever he decides. The number of pro-Trump commentators, analysts, lawmakers who have effectively just echoed J.D. Vance's sentiment, I think it's a very long list, and one of them is our former colleague at Fox News, Molly Hemingway. On June 12th, Molly issued a warning on social media, in effect saying, hey, this would be a disaster if Trump does this. It will it will destroy him and the movement he leads if he were to participate, initiate massive escalation, or even greenlight it. She said, this is it. It would be seen as an unforgivable betrayal by millions of American voters. And some 2 or 3 days later, Molly was on Fox News touting Trump's statesmanship on this issue, in effect echoing J.D. Vance's points, or whatever Trump decides is good with her. And he's earned a lot of trust in these issues, so we should, in effect, defer to him. What's going on here? How should people understand that?
Oh, first of all, it would take a heart of stone not to laugh at the spectacle. But So first of all, I'm gonna toot my own horn here for a second. I've been making this argument for 10 years now that any attempt to impose a coherent and consistent philosophical, ideological program on Trumpism always founders. Always. And I first started writing about this when they were going to come out with that Kreins guy coming up with a Journal of American Affairs or whatever it was, some sort of
Julius Krein,
some eggheady sort of journal to be the intellectual home to Trumpism. And I was just like, this is not a possible project. I wrote about it at the time, saying you're either going to have to break with Trump about something at some point, or you're going to have to just keep bending whatever you're for to fit his program. That dynamic has proven true time and time again, because there is no inherent, immutable, consistent ideological content to Trumpism. Trump said it the other day. He said, he was wrong when he said, I invented the term America First, so I get to decide what it means. America First has a long history. He was ignorant of it. But his political point is entirely accurate, is that he gets to decide what Trumpism is, and he brags about the fact that he changes his mind all of the time. And he thinks that's a feature of his brilliance, is that he just wants to listen to his instincts. And so the only safe harbor, again, something I've been saying for 10 years now, the only safe harbor for pro-Trump people is to come down and finally just say, look, I just trust his instincts. I defer to his judgment. That is the genesis of where this 4D chess thing originally came from, was that nobody could explain on rational terms with earth logic and basic facts what he was doing or why he was doing it. And so they invented this heuristic, which just basically says, look, he's just thinking so many steps ahead. We just got to trust him. And whenever you get into one of these situations, that's where 99% of these people fall back on. And I'll just, one last point, because it's a toot your own horn Thursday here. On June 6th, I wrote a G-file about the Musk-Trump wars, which now seem like such ancient history. And the title of it was The Inevitable Splintering to Come. And I just made a basic point, which I think this is evidence of, is that the all majority coalitions have warring factions. As I often point out, FDR's coalition had communist Jews and blacks and the Klan in it, right? That is what you get when you get a majority coalition, is you get different factions who disagree with each other. Minority coalitions have the luxury of ideological consistency. The Trump coalition is not a very large majority coalition, but it is a majority coalition, and it's got very competing interests, ideological, economic, inside of it. And as I pointed out, 3 weeks ago, this fight we're seeing now about Iran and Israel is one of these fault lines within the MAGA coalition that is irreconcilable other than with appeals to cult of personality arguments about Trump. And it is one of the reasons why I think the post-Trump GOP is not going to be is going to be a free-for-all with these different factions openly going to war with each other, because he's the only thing holding it all together. And so the Vance defense of Tulsi Gabbard thing is he wants to be the head of that faction. He needs some faction on his side, and he has this dream of unifying the entire MAGA coalition, which means that whenever one part of the coalition is about to be thrown overboard, he wants to do what he can to keep it in the boat. And I just don't think he's got the political talent or charisma to pull that off over the long term, but I think that's what he's thinking about.
Sarah, can I take the same question or similar question to you? Jonah said he gets to decide what Trumpism is, he being Donald Trump. And Donald Trump said something very similar this week, pushing back on Tucker Carlson, right? Or these claims that what he's doing with respect to Iran are not America first. He said, I'm the one who decides what's America's first. Is that right? Is this as far as it goes?
Yes, and I think that efforts by his supporters to claim him and build an ideology around him have always failed. I think it's 100% failure rate. Like saying that Donald Trump is an isolationist. That was never true. It's not that it used to be true and now it's not. It was never true to call him an isolationist. Donald Trump isn't an ideologue. And, you think back to when he gets elected in 2016 and the space between his election and his inauguration, there was real concern within the conservative movement that Donald Trump would govern from the center, that he would make deals with Democrats, and that potentially he would, in fact, be so swayed if they were super nice to him and conservatives tried to hold the line, that he could actually sort of be a quite liberal president, like Democratic liberal president. That was the real thought among conservatives in November and December about Donald Trump. They seem to have totally forgotten that and now try to like hungry hippo pieces of Donald Trump into their own ideological camps, whether it's common good constitutionalism or isolationism or you name the issue area, and there's an ideologue out there who claims to carry Trump's banner up the hill. 100% failure rate. Now, I do think that it makes sense for them, and I think building out a sort of think tanky world around Donald Trump makes some sense. It certainly is profitable for those who do it. Gets them jobs, and they get to say that, they've got a white paper on this issue of whatever Donald Trump wants to do. But again, 100% failure rate.
Yeah, I mean, John, it was not long ago after Donald Trump gave this major foreign policy speech in Riyadh on his trip to the region that, it gave birth to dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of chin-stroking think pieces declaring this is the Trump doctrine. And in that speech, he raised the potential threats from Iran, but he also staked out a foreign policy view that was markedly different from his Republican predecessors, certainly contrasted himself with Joe Biden. And you had everybody saying, hey, this is the Trump doctrine. Is there such a thing as the Trump doctrine?
No. I mean, what Sarah said, I go back to, his first campaign for president. He was for the Iraq War before he was against it. During the campaign, he both said, why don't we just let Syria and ISIS fight it out? Why are we going to get involved? He also said we needed 30,000 ground troops on the ground during the campaign that he, won decisively. Now Steve Bannon is trying to retcon this and saying that really the key moment for Trump, the key moment in all this was when in the South Carolina debate he said that Jeb Bush was connected to W and W had lied us into war. That's actually not true. As someone who, remembers all this, lived through it, Trump was actually up by like 30 points in South Carolina, and then he won by 20 points after that. So the idea is, as Sarah said, sort of just like construct this ideology around Trump has always failed, and he's mercurial, he's an egomaniac, he likes strength, and when he sees the strength that Israel has, approached Iran with and been decisive and victorious, I think he thinks, well, this isn't very costly if we get involved and take this out. So it's been very interesting, and I would say one more point on the MAGA world people. Trying to do this. I think part of it isn't just playing to their audience. They are also trying to maintain their ability to influence Trump. I think that's true of what you just mentioned with Molly Hemingway. It's true of Tucker calling Trump and saying whatever Trump described as an apology. And it's remarkable right now, they're all trying, sort of Tucker and everyone else, to sort of, rather than actually have the specific debate on whether a U.S. strike on a nuclear facility in Iran, Fordow, makes sense, they're sort of trying to have now a debate about regime change wars. And well, you just really want a regime change war. You don't want. That's interesting to me that these are people who are very close to Trump. They know how to push his buttons and sort of turn him and manipulate him. So that's where they are right now.
Can I just though? I feel like John's version of this, and maybe it sounded this way when I was talking about it too, is the negatives of Trump not being an ideologue and not having a sort of singular worldview. But just to be clear, I think it can be a very good thing to have a president who's not an ideologue and doesn't come in with I know everything about the world and I see every problem through the exact same lens of my, preconceived ideological priors. I think back to that December 2016 time, and that president that they were describing could have been a very effective president. Now, I think there's lots of reasons that it would be really interesting to go back through and say why it happened the way that it did. Was Trump never going to govern that way? Or did Democrats lose their opportunity to have Trump govern that way? There's plenty of evidence for both of those. But regardless, having a non-ideological president could have been pretty good. I mean, Bill Clinton was arguably a non-ideological president. I don't know, Jonah, who else would you say is sort of our most non-ideologue captured presidents?
Eisenhower.
I mean, I'm going to generally say that the non-ideologues have been better than the ideologues, again, on sort of a very general whatever. Donald Trump has other problems. Being non-ideological is not the cause of those problems, though, to me.
Yeah, so I generally take your point. I think it's a good point. I think the problem is that he's not simply non-ideological. He's unprincipled. And there's a difference between the two things. His view of, when talking about Putin being a killer, we all kill people, right? And I thought,
but Jonah, this goes to it's one of my favorite things that you say. Behind every double standard is a single more important standard.
Yeah.
I don't think he's unprincipled. It's just that the principle isn't, maybe an honorable one, but there is a principle there.
Well, yeah, whatever's good for him, which I think we can get into a whole
so he's
semantic
deeply
thing.
principled.
Yeah.
Is it a principle or is it an
yes, he's the most
operating
principled
standard?
president
Right.
we've ever had. Yes. But he has no principled objection to rolling over the Constitution. He has no principled objection to using American troops, military on American streets. He has no principled objection with rewarding dictators and throwing allies under the bus, right? He has no principled guardrails. And my view about particularly about foreign policy has always been, I'm entirely in favor of pragmatism and realism about means, but you have to have some idealism about ends. And I don't think there's a lot of idealism about ends with Donald Trump beyond the media cycle. And that's
imagine a world imagine that Donald Trump's number one principle is to be on the winning side of whatever it is, right? The winning side of every debate in Congress, the winning side of every primary campaign in every state, and the winning side of every foreign conflict. When it comes to foreign policy, and I again, I'm not saying it's any of your preferred things. I think y'all have different principles. But is it that bad for America to be on the winning side if that were his overarching principle?
Yes. And we can do a game theory thing. We can have ChatGPT and Claude game this out if we want. But the idea that in the long term it's good for America. Let's say Russia declares war on Sweden.
Poland. Yeah, I don't know.
Or Poland. Yeah. And we think Russia's going to win, so therefore we side with Russia on that. Short term, he gets to claim victory in a media cycle or two. Long term, no one ever will want to be our ally. And there's also the sort of bird of prey problem that Evan Burke talked about what it actually does to the American people. That we
it would
now
totally
have,
alter that.
Yeah, as a totally cynical view of just using power for our own glory.
But this is why Donald Trump, again and again, reminds me of Henry VIII. I really think there's no better historical example for Donald Trump than Henry VIII.
He's got to get to work to catch up on the wife count.
Well, he doesn't get
short.
to. I know, but beheadings just aren't as in vogue as they once were, and that's going to slow you down. Let's be real.
He needs a better matrimonial lawyer than get that beheading clause in there.
I mean, Henry VIII didn't love his divorce lawyers either. Cardinal Wolsey found that out the hard way.
Fair.
Let me wrap this segment up with one last question to Jonah.
Is it about Cardinal Wolsey?
It's not. I was going to move us on from Cardinal Wolsey.
Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell.
Interesting as it
Cranmer?
might be.
Oh, so good.
But I want to get to a discussion of political violence in a moment. But I first want to ask Jonah. What's been striking to me about this debate over the past week, most intensely, but really on a longer term basis, is we discuss these decisions of war and peace, and these decisions of where Trump is, and the question of whether the United States should support Iran to achieve a military objective that I do think has profound implications for our own national security, Iran's potential becoming a nuclear state. And there's almost no discussion about sort of Trump's leadership and character as it relates to this. Everybody sort of ends up in the place that you would expect them to be on a strict policy level, and almost sets aside this problem for me that it's Donald Trump who's leading the policy, who's executing this. So to take myself, I think it's important that Iran not have a nuclear weapon. I think if the United States made a decision that we couldn't permit this under any circumstances and had to work with Israel to eliminate the nuclear facilities at Fordow and the rest of the nuclear program in Iran, I would be for that in the abstract. But doesn't it matter that it is Donald Trump who is making these decisions, that he is saying these things publicly about, hey, I might take out the supreme leader. Maybe I won't. Actually, I'm not going to for now. And sort of, treating this as if it's almost a game show. I would probably be in favor of this kind of kinetic military action with U.S. involvement, which we think a successful attack on Fordow probably does need U.S. involvement. If it were another president, I'm not so sure I favor it if it's Donald Trump. Am I wrong to think about it that way?
I think you're a victim of something that afflicts all of us, which is that people just don't want to argue about Donald Trump very much anymore. Or at least it's fruitless to argue about. It feels fruitless often to argue about Donald Trump because Donald Trump is going to be Donald Trump. It's kind of become Aesopian, right? The scorpion's just going to do the scorpion thing. Trump's going to do the Trump thing. And so that's one of the reasons why you get these really warped, extremely online, like factional fights, because the White House cares way too much about social media, and nobody can criticize Trump, so everybody goes after each other instead. And look, I do think it matters. I think Trump's leadership style, which I use the term very advisedly, matters a great deal. I think he makes America fundamentally less reliable for our allies, but also less predictable for our enemies, which is not necessary. Like, there's a lot to be said for having enemies worried about what we're going to do. But there's also a downside to it because it creates more and more opportunities for miscalculation. And I increasingly, during all of this, feel like Fred Thompson, Hunt for Red October, where I look up at the cable, I watch it for 5 minutes, and I'm like, this is going to get out of hand and somebody's going to die, right? I mean, like, that's the vibe here. And
well, can I ask a question, Jonah? Which is, if I'm Iran, assume for a moment that they believe that they cannot, over the long term, match Israel's bombardments. And so, therefore, over the long term, they will lose. And it's an existential threat to the Ayatollah and their current regime.
Right.
And they're on a losing trajectory. So, literally anything they can do to change that trajectory is better, because it may also put them on a losing trajectory. But if you're guaranteed to currently be on a losing trajectory, any change at least gives you a probability of success, even if it's 5 or 10%. Why, in that case, would you not attack the United States and bring us into the war because that at least gives you then, I think, a higher probability of potentially drawing in Russia or China and making this a world war in the true sense. And like, yeah, maybe you end up on the losing side of that, but maybe you don't. And if you're going to lose right now, 100%, change those odds. In which case, I don't know that Donald Trump matters a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very skeptical. I mean, there were a lot of people who said we were going to have World War III because Iran has these allies in China and Russia, and Russia and China are like, yeah, you're going to have to go work out this on your own pretty quickly. And
yeah, they're not going to come in now. I get that.
Yeah.
But like Pearl Harbor this, Japan, we all look back and say made a huge strategic mistake with Pearl Harbor. Maybe they did, but as long as they changed their odds,
yeah.
then it was still the correct strategy, even if they ended up losing in the end. This is like my whole thing about campaigns. The winning campaign didn't do everything right, and the losing campaign didn't do everything wrong. We get second guess for good reason on the Carly campaign. And my point is, we were going to lose anyway. We did something that also put us, to lose. It doesn't mean it was the wrong tactic. It just means we were probably going to lose no matter what.
Right. Losing was overdetermined. Yeah, I get it. I think part of the answer, and I talked about this a little bit with Ken Pollack, is it's very interesting for all of the damage Israel is doing to Iran, they are not taking out the political leadership. And I don't just mean the Ayatollah. I mean, they're not taking out the head of parliament. They're not taking out the president. They're not taking out, elected leaders. They're taking out military dudes, at a Spinal Tap drummer pace, which is kind of awesome. And they're taking out nuclear scientists and some IRGC kind of stuff, but not a lot of IRGC stuff. And Ken's argument is Israel doesn't necessarily think they're going to get regime change out of this. And so they need to have something in reserve to threaten what the next time will look like. Like you saw what we did that time, we saw what we did in June of 2025. Next time, we're not going to start with the military leaders. We're going to start with the political leaders, and we are going to completely remove the regime. And someone was saying, I can't remember who, that the Iranians are homicidal, but they're not suicidal, and they don't want to be killed. Israel has demonstrated a remarkable capacity for killing the people that they want to kill in recent years, right?
It really is something.
It's really impressive.
You gotta hand it to them.
First in class kind of stuff. And so they want to have, there has to be what 11 looks like since we're talking Spinal Tap, right? And that's why they're holding the regime change card in check. So I think if Iran attacked America, first of all, it would make Donald Trump very, very angry. And it would also give Trump permission to give Bibi permission to say, do whatever you want to do now, and we're going to give you all the support you need. But even in that scenario, all these people talking about how they don't want American troops fighting to fight Israel's wars. I don't think there's going to be anywhere in any likely scenario, or even remotely likely scenario, American troops on the ground fighting a war. There might be pilots, right, and there support stuff, and Iran could do stuff to our Navy, which would invite a really vicious retaliation. But all these people who are doing this is a replay of the Iraq War miss the point that no one is talking about actually invading, occupying with an army Iran, and I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the areas where the Iraq War comparisons don't hold up. There were plenty of other short-term kinetic actions, times that we took out specific, we took out the Iraqi intelligence headquarters, stopping well before a full-scale invasion and the war in 2003. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. We did not get to political violence, but I think it was worth going deep on this question because it's a big question. But
we'll just say we're against political violence.
We're against political violence. I do think there's a lot to discuss there. We will get back to that next week. We decided that not worth your time this week was, in fact, not worth our time. So we're skipping that too. Thanks to John, Sarah, and Jonah, and thanks to you all for joining us.